So this is an abridged story, abridged version of a story I wrote for the summer writing seminar run by Marine Corps veteran Lucas Prowley, another PCVI alumnus. I've had to cut a fair amount of detail in order to shorten it up for tonight's event, so I hope it still holds together well enough. It's still a little long, but I wanted something a little bit lighter than what I presented last year, which was pretty dark, and I thought that this met that criterion. It's kind of a story about how being in the service isn't always either heroic or horrific, how sometimes it's just bullshit and bureaucracy. It's called Be Careful What You Wish For. I got the message to call the battalion commander in the Green Zone after returning from a meeting with one of the local neighborhood governing councils. I think we had been discussing building a security shack for the guards at a trash transfer station, one of the facilities the U.S. military had developed to help move trash out of the crowded streets of Baghdad to a dump on its outskirts. Not exactly something you usually think of when you think about soldiers heading off to a war zone, but one of those things an occupying force becomes responsible for when it invades another country. I headed to my desk at brigade headquarters and placed the call. Major Millette, how are things going on the east side of the Tigris? We're fighting the good fight, sir, you know, helping to keep the water flowing and the streets clean. Well, Bill, I know you've been asking for additional personnel since we first got here, and I think I may just have the answer to your prayers. You got some soldiers for me, sir? Well, not some, but one, a major, just arrived from the States. Supposed to be reporting here to battalion headquarters tomorrow after he processes through Camp Victory. So when can I get him? How about you swing by after the project meeting with General Webster this Thursday? Works for me, sir. Thank you. Thank you big time. When I hung up the phone, I was stoked. I had been asking my battalion commander for assistance with my personnel shortages for months. It was early 2005, and I was commanding a civil affairs company on the east side of Baghdad. We had been on the ground for about 6 months and had just transitioned from supporting 1st Cavalry Division to supporting 3rd Infantry Division. I had not expected to be commanding a company in Iraq. I had spent about 18 months prior to my deployment studying Arabic at the Defense Language Institute, and had expected that I would be working with the Iraqi Interim Governing Council, as an officer with our sister battalion had done after he had studied Arabic. Without going into all the dirty details, let's just say that chronic personnel mismanagement policies at higher headquarters got in the way of that plan. A civil affairs company is nothing like an infantry company. It is much smaller, around the size of an infantry platoon, with 32 authorized soldiers. However, due to a policy that allows units to depart the mobilization station with only 75% of its authorized strength, my company left Fort Bragg with only 24 personnel who had come from 18 different units across the country and had only trained together for a few weeks before entering the war zone. As if that were not bad enough, the company we were replacing was overstrength, with 42 assigned personnel, 10 more than authorized. I was excited then to learn that I would be gaining another officer who could assist with all of the activities at company headquarters. My enthusiasm, however, was short-lived. At first glance, Ted, the officer my battalion commander assigned to my company after my continued entreaties, looked to be just what the BC had called him, the answer to my prayers. Thin and wiry, he appeared physically fit, and the 3 tabs on his left shoulder, Airborne, Ranger, and Special Forces, were indicative of a soldier who was highly squared away. Something had to have happened to Ted in the years between when he earned those tabs and when he arrived at my company, though, because it soon became clear that the man wearing the uniform with those tabs would no longer have been fit to serve in any Airborne, Ranger, or Special Forces unit at that time. Our company headquarters team ventured off our forward operating base, or FOB, just about every day. And one of the tasks that needed to be accomplished every time we returned to our FOB was to clear our weapons at the weapons barrel. This was an essential and simple task, necessary to ensuring the safety and well-being of our fellow soldiers. It is a basic soldier skill, what the Army refers to as a level 1 warrior skill. It is a task that a soldier cannot leave basic training without mastering. This was, however, a task Ted refused to complete. You might think that an officer wearing the tabs Ted wore this would be second nature, but for Ted, the fear of failing to complete the task properly and negligently firing a bullet into the clearing barrel, which constituted an offense under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and could result in an Article 15 or at least a general officer letter of reprimand that would serve as an impediment to future promotions, outweighed the fear of potentially injuring or killing a fellow soldier. If I have a negligent discharge bill, it will ruin my career, Ted told me. Oops. Well, Ted, I replied, I would rather you ruin your career than you ruin someone's life. So if you refuse to clear your weapon when we come back on the fob after a mission, you're not going out on future missions. Despite the fact that the clearing procedures were printed on a board adjacent to the clearing barrel, and despite having the first sergeant provide Ted with remedial instruction on weapons clearing procedures, Ted twice more refused to clear his weapon at the clearing barrel when we returned from missions off the fob, and based on the principle that 3 strikes, you're out, Ted never again left our fob during his tour in Iraq until the day the company left our fob to travel by helicopter to Baghdad International Airport to await our flight back to the States. Ted's incompetence wasn't limited to shortfalls with basic soldier skills, though. I tried having him assemble the daily report on our team's activities we sent up to division headquarters and copied to our civil affairs chain of command, but that too proved beyond Ted's capabilities, even though it had been competently handled by a corporal prior to Ted's arrival. There would be easily correctable spelling, grammar, or formatting errors, or major accomplishments would be omitted from the report. And then there was the time one of the teams accompanied an agricultural team out for a survey of farms growing lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, onions, carrots, and other vegetables, which Ted had reported as a team going out to inspect fields of salad. Fields of salad. It would often take me longer to fix the problems when reviewing the report before sending it out than if I had just started from scratch myself. So Ted managed to be relieved from that task as well. And having him work with the brigade staff on planning only sucked up more of my time trying to argue against the ill-advised missions he would suggest. The essence of Ted's uselessness occurred one day as the company headquarters personnel sat around a plastic table in our motor pool rehearsing a mission we had planned for the following day. Ted didn't participate in these meetings because Ted didn't leave the fob, but they included our interpreter, Mr. Kurdi, who was Arabic and had a darker skin tone typical of most residents of Baghdad. Mr. Kurdi's complexion grew as light as the tan Humvees parked in our motor pool, though, when Ted came out of his room carrying a fully inflated blow-up doll and exclaimed, "Hey, everybody, look what my wife just sent me." Now, mind you, one of the missions for civil affairs soldiers is to advise our supported unit on cultural sensitivities among the local population. To have Ted come out of his room to show everyone his newly arrived blow-up doll, and particularly to do so in the presence of a Muslim interpreter, was utterly beyond comprehension. After my first sergeant and I rose from the table to escort Ted back to his room and quickly read him the riot act, we returned to the table to offer our apologies to Mr. Kurdi, who, thankfully, was familiar with the challenges Ted posed. He had, after all, been present when Ted refused to clear his weapon at the barrel and knew that was why Ted no longer went out on missions with us, and he graciously accepted them. That wasn't the last of my problems, though, with Ted. At the end of every tour, soldiers are put in for awards for their service during their deployment. Unfortunately, awards aren't always equitably distributed, and I was aware that if I put in Ted for an award through the 3rd ID chain of command, he was going to be awarded a Bronze Star, regardless of his ineptitude and the many challenges he had posed for me. Field grade officers, those in the grades of 04 through 06, were going to receive at least Bronze Stars just for being there, but I wasn't having it. Having 2 prior deployments under my belt, I knew that a soldier can only receive 1 award for service during a deployment. You can receive multiple awards for actions or accomplishments, but only 1 award for service. The fact that a soldier can only receive 1 award for a given period provided me with an option that would ensure Ted would not be awarded a Bronze Star he did not deserve. And I took advantage of that option. Though my company supported a brigade in 3rd ID, we had a parallel civil affairs chain of command, and my battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel, had the authority to approve an Army Achievement Medal, the lowest ranking award for a given period of service. When I approached my battalion commander with my proposal, his response was, "Major Millette, I like the way you think." He had at that point been expressing regret to me for months for having burdened me with Ted when I had been seeking assistance. He had gotten the backstory on Ted only after sending him down to my company, but there was no way he could pull Ted out from my company and assign him somewhere else. Despite being the full-time operations officer for his battalion back in the States, the unit had elected to leave Ted behind as the rear detachment commander rather than bring him with them when they deployed. Clearly, Ted was not just a challenge for me, but it had been a challenge for others as well. After the unit deployed, Ted had somehow weaseled his way up to higher headquarters and talked someone into sending him over to Iraq. He had apparently been sent over with instructions that he not be assigned below division level, but those instructions were apparently lost en route, and so he ended up not at division, not at brigade, not a battalion, but down at my company, where it only increased my problems rather than helping to relieve them. And thus it came to pass that one day, before my company was scheduled to be taken by helicopter from our FOB to the airport to await our flight back to the States, Ted and I stood among other members of my company during an award ceremony presided over by the brigade commander we supported. The commander moved from soldier to soldier, pinning the medal each soldier was being awarded to the soldier's chest as his adjutant read the award citation. Ted was positioned to my right, with another officer positioned between us. As the brigade commander went to pin Ted's award to his chest and his adjutant read the citation, I could see the look of incredulity pass across his face. This was a major standing in front of him, and he was pinning on an Army Achievement Medal? What the hell was going on? By the time the commander stood in front of me, though, he had figured it out. He didn't get to be a brigade commander without a certain amount of intelligence. As he finished pinning my award onto my chest, he looked me in the eye and said, "Major Millette, I'm going to need to see you in my office after this ceremony." "Yes, sir," I replied. When I arrived, the colonel clearly was not happy. "What the hell is going on with one of your field grade officers getting an AAM for his time in Iraq, Major?" he demanded. I knew it wasn't going to matter to him, that Ted didn't deserve anything more than an AAM, but I tried anyway. To say that he proceeded to tear me a new asshole would be putting it mildly. He was livid. It was an embarrassment to him that a field grade officer that had supported his unit was leaving Iraq with an AAM. Perhaps it was because I refused to apologize, but the colonel did his best to make my life miserable. I wasn't aboard the helicopters the next day when my unit departed the FOB, and he kept me on the FOB several more days, allegedly to continue my transition with my relief, until the point where if he kept me another day, I would have missed my flight back to the States, and where he would have had some explaining to do to his commanding general. I finally returned my unit for our flight out of Iraq, but we didn't return directly to the States. We first had to pass through Kuwait for processing. While we were there, Ted confronted me one day about what he deemed to be his unfair treatment with being given an AAM rather than a Bronze Star. I told Ted that I had written up my award recommendations based on merit rather than rank, and that I felt his performance didn't justify anything more than AAM, while other, more junior ranking officers and NCOs and enlisted soldiers had outperformed him and been awarded Army Commendation Medals or Bronze Stars. At that point, Ted decided to poke me in the chest and loudly proclaim, "You're fucked up," which, of course, was not something I was about to take from Ted, particularly in front of a bunch of the battalion soldiers who were now turned to look at the commotion in front of them. I shoved Ted back, sending him flying a few feet through the air. Despite his airborne training, Ted did not perform a parachute landing fall, but landed on his backside and lay there on the dusty ground as I walked away. And that is how my battalion commander, much to his dismay, came to have to issue me a letter of reprimand to be placed in my local file for failing to exercise good judgment in responding to Ted's provocation. Ted got one too, of course, but that one was issued without any regret by the battalion commander. And so that's why I say, be careful what you wish for.